Hello there, I'm Crofty. Welcome back to this season of Formula One. Welcome to Silverstone, the home of British motorsport, where the crowds are roaring and the stakes couldn't be higher. George Russell starts from pole, Lando Norris alongside. It's lights out, and away we go.
As radio check, Max.
Yep, loud and clear.
Automatic telemetry is green. Track temp is 48 degrees Celsius. Launch map set.
You ready? Copy.
Out and clear. Engine mode 7 will do bike point learn in 5 seconds. Brake balance, forward 2 clicks.
Understood. Mode 7, brake balance adjusted. Copy. Let's go.
Max, you are coming up on turn 1.
Copy.
Max, copy this. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Ahead. Slow delta.
Can't hear you say again.
Accident, you need.
Can't hear you.
Max, copy to stay. Max, copy to stay.
I am getting double feed. Please repeat.
You okay? Copy.
Copy.
Stay in the vehicle. The safety car is starting.
Hi, and welcome Cyber Defenders back to the Cyberspeak Labs. My name is Reanna Schultz, and I'll be your aide today as I guide you through different learning opportunities here in Cyberspeak Labs. With the new Formula One movie featuring Brad Pitt out in theaters now, I decided to craft a very special episode that goes over cyber threats and risk in Formula One racing. Now, before we race to the finish with this episode, I do want to take a few moments to promote CyberLab Con. CyberLab Con is a conference that is being held through Cyberspeak Labs on Thursday, July 17th. And you might be asking, well, Reanna, where is it located? Good for you. CyberLab Con is a virtual conference that will be live streaming through the lab's YouTube channel. And what is even more exciting is that this conference is free to attend. I'm very, very, very excited to be collaborating with the nonprofit Missouri Cyber Center of Excellence for this conference, and the goal is to raise $5,000 for their organizations. Now, if you want to help support this event, Cyberspeak Labs does have conference merch for this, and half of the proceeds from this conference merch will be donated to partner with the nonprofit. The first 50 buyers for this merch will receive a very limited and rare Cyberspeak Labs sticker. And to make your life a little bit easier as well, I did make sure to link the conference registration and the merch store in the description of the podcast. So, without further ado, let's put on our white coats and enter the lab to learn. If you have no idea what Formula One is, well, let me just say my condolences already. No, I'm just kidding. We're here to learn about the lab. And if you do go through this podcast episode and you're like, oh my gosh, Formula One sounds awesome. Me personally, I'm a huge F1 fan. Yes, it is awesome. What makes Formula One, in my opinion, really, really cool and really, really special is that the cars and the drivers are from literally all over the world. These drivers go through intense, and I mean intense, training to be able to withstand vehicle speed going over 200 miles per hour. Fun fact, these cars go faster than a bullet train. So yeah, just let that sink in. Now, how I like to compare the driver's training is very, very similar, in my opinion, to how astronauts go through special training to withstand the G-forces of a spaceship. These F1 drivers have to do the same thing with their cars. And this is what brings a whole other elevated experience with this F1 is just because of the logistics of how this race is formatted and calculated in the different types of tracks. And at the very end, the racers go through the championship Grand Prix. Now, fun fact, the first ever Grand Prix was launched in 1950 that contained a total of 7 races. However, in today's era, it's a little bit different. There are roughly around 24 races a year across many different countries and many different cities. And what makes the sport super competitive for the entire season is each driver goes through and completes the race. And based off of how and what position they are in the race, they will earn points. So obviously someone who finishes in first place will get more points compared to someone who finished in last place. And at the very end, in the overall Grand Prix, whoever has the most points will win the grand prize. So depending on how they competed in other races can add a different factor theoretically to the very end for the championship. Now, the drivers are one element to making the sport super extreme. However, the car that the drivers perform add a whole other element. F1 cars are not like your standard street or boxcar models. No, these cars are specially made from carbon fiber, which makes them very strong and very light. And this is very, very key to today's engineering of these sports cars. And since these cars are known to go very, very fast, and when you have a very, very, very fast car, it is very, very, very important to ensure the car's health is monitored very, very closely and efficiently. And I'm not even talking about the aerodynamics of the car. I'm talking about if a single bolt on this car breaks, it could potentially cost that racing team a large sum of money, and including points for that very end championship. Now, in today's F1 racing, it's a common practice for teams to have real-time monitoring on these vehicles because an average F1 car, and I didn't know this until making this podcast, but an average F1 car has over 300 sensors sending live data back to the engineering team that is located in the pit. This data includes tire pressure, engine temp, fuel usage, and other health monitoring. And this eliminates the guessing game as to when tires need to be changed. Hey, do brakes need to be pushed back to a different elevation? It allows data-driven results to improve the car's performance and potentially avoid accidents on the track. Because trust me, if one of these cars gets into an accident, it is not a cheap fix to replace. The steering wheel of these cars at minimum, costs roughly about $50,000 just to replace. And that is because that steering wheel is essentially the brain of the entire car. This is where a driver shifts their gears. This is how a driver fixes any feedback given from the pit and their engineers or safety factors when the car is being worked on. You know, literally it is the brain and nervous system for this entire vehicle. And in fact, F1 cars in 2025 were disclosed to be a range from costing of $12 to $20 million. In fact, 90% of that cost goes into the manufacturing and production of the engine alone. This is why I asked myself when I first started watching Formula One, why are these cars so expensive? This is a lot of Chipotle bowls. This is a lot of I don't know, McDonald's value meals. It's a lot, right? Now, if you do watch F1, you will notice something very interesting, especially if you watch it through TV. You see a lot of celebrities walking through the pits or people having very high-class, sophisticated executive seating. And I will say, these F1 tickets are not cheap if you want to have a literal seat. And there is a form of ticket called door entry. It might differ on the name depending on the location, but there is no guarantee there will have room near the track for you to watch or even enjoy the race, let alone have a seat or be around a bathroom. There are people that will sit outside of the arena and course track just to even listen to Formula One. And of course, the more money you spend for SOSA tickets and packages. This can include different experiences. This can include drink packages, the comfort of air conditioning in private bathrooms, or even food. Because, especially for the one in Texas and Vegas, it is so hot at these events. And trust me, everyone just smells. And you would be wishing that you had a few extra $1,000s to throw into your ticket package just to have the comfort of air conditioning. And that doesn't even include parking or transportation or flights or hotels or driving and gas or anything else. Because trust me, by the end of this 3-day event, you just want to go and shower and apply copious of unhealthy amounts of deodorant. Now, getting off track here. After doing some more digging on the behind the scenes of these cars, it explains why the cost is so much. Besides the endorsements, the mechanics, the training, the people, the PR, marketing, socials, etc., there is literally a whole village behind the scenes to make these teams functional. And I'm talking about data analysts, strategists, specific automotive engineers, trainers, and yes, there are even private chefs. And 1 ounce of something wrong that could add weight to the car, the driver, etc. All of this money and endorsements literally takes a village to make a very successful Formula One team. And every year, it gets a little more competitive for each of the teams. And I'm not talking about the driver's passion for competition. I'm talking about the technology that is a driving force for a lot of these cars. Every year, teams upgrade their cars just to stay current and competitive. They go through a large amount of demos, testings. They even start incorporating machine learning to identify outliers, designing new parts to push the change for an evolving race car. So I guess what you could say is Bill Nye the Science Guy was right. Science is pretty cool, especially when it's about race cars. Now, some Formula One teams might have more budget because of sponsorship or just the brand in general. More sponsorship means more money. More money typically means that there's more budget to throw at the engineering teams to make cool products for their car. Now, in the 2021 season, F1 did incorporate a cost cap to limit the amount of money teams can spend on designing, developing, and operating their cars for the season. Basically, this is enforcing the must-haves and the have-nots just to make a more neutral competing environment for the rest of the F1 teams who might not have such a sky's the limit budget. Now, if you really think about it, we have come a very long way on how we innovate and use technology for Formula One. In fact, we can start with one of the earlier events for technology and security evolution. And this started in the 1990s with a man named Evan Short. Evan Short, from my research, appears to be a overall very private, normal individual. He pursued higher education at the University of British Columbia and had graduated there in 1998. The following year, Evan had joined Ferrari's F1 team as an electronics engineer. And as of current day, and in fact the last 15 years, Evan has worked for Mercedes F1 team as their lead race team electronics leader. Evan has a very notable and awarding career. He has been recognized throughout different articles by his peers to be acknowledged with a driven attitude during his employment with Mercedes. In fact, he has won 2 manufacturing awards on the Grand Prix podium for his skills and dedication for his involvement with Mercedes. Now, usually when you hear about someone like Evan, it's not uncommon to stereotype them as someone who's probably a leader within their team, a role model in their profession's field, someone who probably has strong ethics and commitment to his team. And that's who Evan is. Evan is that person. In fact, there are a lot of YouTube videos of Evan being interviewed and just generally talking about his experience with Mercedes. And you have to like this guy. He's very charismatic. He's very humble. He's just a big old teddy bear with Mercedes. But before Evan became the legend he is today, there was one Grand Prix that changed how communication was being handled for all of Formula One moving forward. During Evan's employment with Ferrari in 1998, one of his job responsibilities included reviewing and looking over Ferrari's car readouts. These readouts are essential to continuously improve the vehicle and driver's performance. In today's readouts, this includes everything from vehicle system errors to what gear the vehicle was in, at what time, etc. Now, since Evan's job was to analyze these readouts in 1998 and 1999, these reports were very different compared to the day. The reports were not always exact and accurate, and they could result into estimations or guessing for a lot of the telemetry that was being pulled from these vehicles in 98 and 99. In fact, a lot of the data had to be pulled from the vehicle and was stored in a very, well, basically they had to put it on a very clunky Windows laptop. So, however, and bless Evan for doing this back in the day compared to now, which a lot of it is cloud storage. But however, some of the data that was stored and collected were the radio calls from the pit to the driver. Now, in 1999, Ferrari's primary competitor was McLaren. And to add to the quote-unquote secrecy of the radio communication, it was not an unknown fact that other teams would happen to eavesdrop on a competing team's radio calls. And this resulted to teams encrypting the radio calls. Now, I use the word encryption very loosely here because it's something I would not define as encryption with today's standards. It was more like shuffling channels around to make it a little more difficult to just casually eavesdrop on the radio calls. And that is exactly what a lot of teams, including McLaren, would do. Now, since Evan's job was to work the readouts, he was tasked with something a little more technical and challenging. Evan went from an electronics engineer to Ferrari's, well, let's just say he basically became a radio spy. Evan would listen to the radio communication with McLaren and notice a repetition pattern of how the combination of sequences with their channel worked. Being able to replicate the pattern and reversing it, Evan Short created the first radio decryption formula in F1 history. And what Evan would do is listen to the McLaren's radio combination, adjust how the sequences work, and then chase down the communication. Regardless of how forbidden this was at the time, and still is, by the way, it could have easily led for disqualification. Evan of the Ferrari team intercepted McLaren's communication for 2 years. 2 years. He was a radio spy for Ferrari. Now, eventually, one of McLaren's engineers caught on due to how, well, let's just say Ferrari's drivers were adjusting in a way that there was no way the driver knew what McLaren's drivers were doing until they got onto the racetrack and Ferrari was one step ahead of other team strategies. And of course, with this being a very friendly, ongoing competition with the two teams, they would have some fun, sarcastic banter because obviously McLaren's engineers caught on and they would start their radio calls by saying good morning to the Ferrari's team manager. And, you know, either way, it was a good piece of history for radios being encrypted. And this was really kind of a turning point for Formula One. It not only prevented other teams from eavesdropping, but it was a start to ensure that there was internal safety precautions to prevent unauthorized access for calls or sensitive information. Now, this allows for other teams to also hear what's happening on the track, and it can bring a whole other level of strategic analysis for the race. However, even though with what Evan did was a blurred line of friendly competition to being disqualified, having the thought of a spy stealing confidential information was a thought that was not heard of, especially when it comes to insider threats. And again, this was also a huge turning point in the history for the Ferrari team. Now, as we fast forward and we go from 1990, we're going into the year of 2007. Ferrari had employed a person whose name is Nigel Stefani. Nigel had a very strong history of working with race cars as early as 1977. He worked with previous automotive brands as a mechanic with Shadow, Lotus, Benton, and then Ferrari in the late 1990s. During his employment with Ferrari, Nigel was part of what Ferrari referred to as the Dream Team. The team working with Ferrari made so great fortunes that it led to a lot of wins for the team and also really pushed a new type of innovative thinking for a lot of the engineers with the team. Now, Nigel eventually had his promotions, went up through the ranks, and was titled chief mechanic through his remainder years of employment. However, even though Ferrari was making leads and headlines, the Dream Team was slowly, becoming more of a nightmare. Towards the end of the 2006 season, majority of the Dream Team had plans of not returning to Ferrari, and this was either due to retirement or some of the members pursuing other opportunities. Now, with the absence of these key players for Ferrari, Nigel felt he had to take on more responsibility and ownership. To Nigel, he was proving his worth towards a soon vacant role for the technical director. However, he didn't really have an impressive background, is a very blunt way of saying it. He had two major flaws against him for the requirements of the position. The first one was he wasn't an engineer, followed by he didn't have a technical engineering background. The Ferrari team took pride that those leading the team had a technical background in the areas they were leading in. Nigel's work experience just included to be in roles of a mechanic. And at the end of the season, according to Nigel, he was allegedly promised by Ferrari to have a new title as technical director with a very large compensation. However, the title and recognition did not come. This aggravated him. And this was because he thought he truly deserved this title and was very frustrated over the lack of commitments that Ferrari had allegedly made. Now, in February of 2007, Nigel was still very upset. Very, very, very upset with the situation. In fact, he went to the internet to vent about how unhappy he was. And not only did he claim how unhappy he was, but he stated, quote, "I am looking at spending a year from Ferrari. I'm not currently happy within the team. I really want to move forward with my career. And that's something that's not happening right now." End quote. And I'm sorry, I read this and I rolled my eyes because this statement on the internet is giving me serious flashbacks from 2010 when I was in middle school and I would post on my Facebook and I was like, had a really hard day today, guys. You know, you don't understand. And then you would change your relationship to it's complicated. I feel like Nigel just openly admitted that his relationship with Ferrari was complicated and he needed the emotional attention from the internet on this. Poor Nigel. So he requested to move to different roles because at this point he's like, well, I'm not going to be a technical director. I might as well try to pursue other opportunities with a fancier title. And that is what happened. Ferrari didn't let him go over his internet scandal, but they let him take a new position as the head of performance development, which is just a fancy title for someone who doesn't have to attend races anymore. And I don't think Ferrari, in my opinion, was really upset with that. They're letting him finish out his contract, and he doesn't have to be around people. However, and by the way, nobody's shocked about this, Nigel wasn't happy with his move. He got in this role. He hated it. He absolutely was not happy. And he felt that he was becoming more of an outcast with his peers and the rest of the Ferrari team. Probably because he's not sitting in the pit being part of all of the chaos. Now, Nigel became filled with rage and unhappiness with this. And honestly, for any of my listeners, especially those who are very unhappy with their place of work, I always have the advice of you have to be honest with your supervisor and you have to have a plan. You can't just go up to your you can, but if you're going up to your supervisor and you're like, "Hey, I'm burned out. I'm tired. I don't have motivation." Why don't you have these things? What is the problem? What is causing all of this? Is it the lack of transparency with your career? Is there anything else? And if you're someone who is in a leadership role listening to this podcast, please make sure you are using one-on-ones. This is your time for your associates, and delivering on ask or providing solutions to their problems goes a long way. It's how culture is built. It is how, honestly, the team's morale is projected. It is a whole butterfly effect with what's going on. So if you are a person that just needs to take PTO, take PTO. You shouldn't have to be feeling like you're on the verge of a mental breakdown to have the acceptance of taking PTO. You should be taking PTO as the same way as if you're sick, you take medicine, right? This is your time. You should not feel guilty. You should not feel obligated. Use your PTO. And mental health, in my opinion, is very, very important. Again, right? You want to make sure that you're not in an emotional state to make life-changing decisions. And making decisions when you're in a very emotional state never leads to good ideas or good outcomes, which is what Nigel experienced. He wanted Ferrari to pay for what they did to him. He wanted them to be sabotaged. Ferrari had a strong reputation around this time for winning Grand Prix. Their drivers had taken titles 2000 all the way to 2004. And at this point, again, this was a huge achievement for F1 history, and Nigel wanted to ruin it. In May of 2007, Ferrari's team were prepping for the Monaco Grand Prix, where they had found white powder around the fuel tanks of one of their cars. Now, if you remember anything of what I said earlier about a single bolt being a huge financial loss, having something done to the fuel tank of the car is not only a very expensive loss and risk, we're now talking about something to be life-threatening, and especially depending on what that powder is. Now, don't get me wrong, it has been a while since I took a chemistry class, but most things that are mixed with fuel and is then lit on fire tends to, well, explode. So this could be extremely dangerous and potentially life-threatening to a lot of people. Ferrari's team took this seriously, as they should, and they called security. Now, during their investigation, they went through the CCTV footage of the pit, and shock to nobody, they discovered Nigel to be around one of the cars that was found to have the white powder. And shortly before the team had discovered the white powder, Nigel happens to be in that same area and then happens to disappear. And it's very interesting, at least to me, for someone whose job function does not require them to be at a race. He was very involved with that race at that time. And after they had discovered this and, the investigation team was like, oh man, we should probably talk to Nigel. They went up to him and they were like, hey, do you care if we search on you just to make sure that you're not associated to this incident? Nigel's like, oh yeah, totally. And guess what? White powder was found to be in his pockets. And the investigation escalated from there. They also had discovered the exact same white powder to be in Nigel's home as well. Now, Nigel, under these speculations, pleaded that it was planted. Someone's trying to tarnish his brand. Clearly, someone at Ferrari is trying to get him fired. This isn't fair. And again, there was no concrete evidence, or from at least my research, and I could be completely wrong, it doesn't appear that Nigel was ever prosecuted with the white powder and potentially dangerous explosion. And I got to asking myself, I was like, what person, of course, when you think white powder, you automatically think about the white powder that is probably found on the streets. I was really thinking, I was like, what? Like, how could someone just have white powder that's accessible and apparently not a concern of illegal usage? And I was like, what are common household white powders that a lot of people have? And I'm thinking baby powder. And I was like, that doesn't make sense for Nigel because he would be probably in his late 40s at this point, maybe 50s. Like, having baby powder just doesn't make sense. But then I was like, laundry detergent. I bet it was laundry detergent or a form of soap, which, if that's the case, holy cow, mixing that into fuel, that's just insane. Now, Ferrari, regardless, consider Nigel to be, well, kind of a risk. Even though there wasn't real charges or whatever, there was enough evidence stacking against him that if he really did do this, he is clearly capable of being a threat to their team. And especially since he is very unpleasant to be around. He's very disgruntled. Everything is unhappy. There are red flags stacking against Nigel. And I'm assuming at this point, Ferrari is probably working with their legal and HR team, talking about what they should do about this guy. And to ensure safety for everyone, Nigel was eventually let go of Ferrari. Now, they were giving him a termination date. Regardless, he was gone by end of the season, and they were still going through the termination process, is what I would assume at this point. Now, Nigel, who during this time leading up to his termination, again, he was frustrated, very frustrated. He was wearing emotions on his sleeve, frustrated. Like, it was very clear something is not okay with Nigel, and he just needed to vent about everything going on with Ferrari, the drama, the office politics, how unfair his career and job is, and how it feels like everyone's out to get him. So Nigel called an old friend and peer of his named Mike Coughlin, who was the chief designer of McLaren at that time. And if you remember, this is Ferrari's #1 competitor. When calling Mike, Nigel was furious. The phone call, however, just fueled Nigel's thirst to sabotage Ferrari even more. I don't really know what Mike said to Nigel when they first had the phone call, but at this point, their phone call went from ranting and vents to formulated plans. And at this point, Nigel began to send emails to Mike about the designs for the bodywork of a Ferrari car. This was the first piece of confidential information that was shared with a competitor. Eventually, Mike started receiving more and more of these emails, more of these plans, more hidden information with Ferrari, and text messages started to arise. And of course, Nigel wasn't acting himself at Ferrari. And allegedly, from what Mike claims, Mike didn't get a good feeling with Nigel. He started becoming worrisome almost. The email chains were never shared to the public or what was truly exchanged between Mike and Nigel. But speaking on the cyber side, especially if I was doing this legal investigation, I wonder if what Mike is saying is true about him being uncomfortable with Nigel at this point. I wonder if there were a few things happening to Mike. One of them, I bet the legal team at McLaren was involved at some point, and they realized the potential risk and how it was not worth happening, especially since this is automatic disqualification for the season. Additionally, another theory that I probably have, again, if Mike is telling the truth on this, is that I wonder if Nigel started using this as a form of blackmail to Mike. Like maybe asking for payments, or he's going to turn McLaren in, because at this point, Nigel already knows mentally that he's out the door and probably is going to be blacklisted with the rest of the Formula One team. So he does not care. But for someone like Mike, who has a great reputation, who knows a lot of people, this could potentially harness Mike's career here. Or another theory that I have was that Nigel was becoming more and more aggressive, based off of the history that we already have and the profile that we have with Nigel, clearly he just is a walking rage storm. And unlike tornadoes or other natural disasters that eventually fizzle out, no, Nigel is just becoming a rage of a wildfire, taking over everything with Ferrari and burning it to the ground. And I wonder if his communication with Mike also got more aggressive and leading Mike to not feel safe, regardless of what caused Mike to change his mind or his motive in communication with Nigel. He asked Nigel to stop talking to him. He's like, dude, you gotta stop. And Nigel did not listen, allegedly, and he continued to share unauthorized documents with Mike. Eventually, Mike had to ask the McLaren's IT team to block Nigel's Ferrari email just to prevent communication being sent to him through the McLaren account. Allegedly. Now, you and I both know blocking a single email on a company network to prevent confidential information to be passed, you know these people took it to a different platform. Maybe this was phone calls, text messages, other forms of emails. Regardless, Mike was allegedly so uneasy during a holiday season that he flew out to Spain to tell Nigel in person to stop contacting him. And according to Mike, allegedly, they went to a restaurant to have coffee to essentially lay out this difficult conversation. And according to Mike, without even asking for this allegedly, Nigel gave Mike a diagram of the brake balance assembly used by Ferrari, which was super, super, super classified because it's a key component of the car. And this escalated even further. They were taking a car, driving back to the airport, and according to Mike, Nigel just handed him over a 780-page dossier containing high detailed and sensitive information about Ferrari's 2007 Formula One car, the car that Ferrari is competing with, the car that has technology and probably large amount of sponsorships and money because they are a winning team back-to-back seasons. According to Mike, he kept the documents out of curiosity, which I'm not a criminal investigator. I do not work in legal. I say this all the time, but I'm calling absolute baloney on Mike's statement here. I like, just common sense, bro. Like, what? There's no need for them to meet up in person for Mike to be like, stop communicating here. I've had a fair number of breakups in my life, and I'm telling you what, majority of them were through text message. And that's just how difficult conversations work with technology like phones or email, especially since it sounds like Nigel and Mike have a history of making a lot of phone calls to have uncomfortable conversations with. So Mike's profile and statement about him flying to Spain during his holiday time off, which should be spent with his family. No, he went to Spain to go tell Nigel hey, we're calling this off. It was a great time. Thanks for the coffee. I'm going to head back to the airport. Like, he wasn't even there that long, it sounds like, based off of his statement. It was just like, okay, we're done. Thank you. And then move on. And don't get me wrong, maybe Mike's a gentleman and preferred these things in person. But why take a long flight just to have coffee with someone to tell them they need to stop talking to you? That doesn't make sense. I'm sorry. It just does not make sense. Other than there was an ulterior motive of getting intel. Because having, especially in 2007, a 780-page document with detailed information probably was not something that could have been emailed back then, or something that you could just casually take a picture of. This is a document that would literally be a large data file for 2007 that would be better printed off than sent in an email. And that shortly after things, Mike's statement just has me all pressed now, because when he got back, him and Nigel, who he allegedly said, hey bro, like, stop talking to me, stop doing what you're doing, it's wrong. No, him and Nigel, after their quote unquote breakup, went to a hiring team for the Honda F1 team and goes, hey, you guys are struggling in the F1 circuit right now. We are both pretty qualified people, and you should hire us as a team because we can build your entire F1 team based off of our highly skills of working with very well competing teams such as Ferrari and McLaren. And in fact, you can hire one of us as a technical director and the other one as a chief designer. Which, shocking. I wonder who wanted to be the technical director out of them two. But allegedly, and I say allegedly, Honda was open to the idea, but from the research I gathered, it was that was as far as it got. It was an open idea, but by the time after they had the discussion with Honda, after everything else, remember that white powder incident a few months earlier? Yeah, it finally hit the news. And guess whose name was plastered all over it? Nigel. So I'm pretty sure Honda saw that and they're like, things are starting to make sense now. We'll keep in touch, and then did the good old recruiter special and just ghost them. Now, eventually, as all bad things come to foresight, Nigel did eventually get caught. And this was because, not because Ferrari's IT team found this or someone in Ferrari. No. Mike's wife took this 780-page document after Mike got back home, handed it over. She decided to make photocopies of this giant document. And again, right, this is 2007. A 780-page document is not friendly for the home office printer. So what she does, she goes to a small photocopy place, hands over these documents and goes, hey, I'm needing copies for this. I'll pick them up end of the day. The guy working this shop was a huge Ferrari fan for F1. And when he looked down at the copies he was making and saw the F1 car and all of the Ferrari logos, he goes, holy cow. And of course, he had to play it cool because clearly something's going on here and he doesn't understand it. But what he did, he went on Google, found a contact for Ferrari and goes, hey, I'm just letting you know. I don't know if this is a thing. It feels weird, but I'm just letting you know. And that was the start and the downfall to essentially all of this secret sensitive information coming out. And this led to Nigel's computer and a few memory sticks taken in for evidence. And in fact, during investigation, it was discovered that 288 text messages, 35 phone calls, and dozens of emails were in scope for this investigation. And Ferrari had stated to refer Nigel as the mole, also known to be an insider threat. And in fact, this confidentiality agreement cost the McLaren team to completely be thrown out of the championship. And they were also fined with $100 million, which, by the way, still stands to be one of the largest fines in sports history ever to be given. All because Mike allegedly is very bad at breakups. So, however, Ferrari has a lot of damage and reputation to recover because essentially their whole season is out in the open at this point. People that shouldn't know about Ferrari's technology, the aerodynamics, the engineering, the sweat, blood, effort, and loss of sleep that went into this car, it's gone at this point. And now they're also known for this disgruntled employee. So this is reputation that is being dragged through them. And also the reason for why McLaren is disqualified, which if you really want to read about this on your own time, there's so many theories and conspiracy theories with it, but it went on for many, many years past this. And when we talk about conspiracy theories, even like with the legal settlements and stuff like that, a lot of people believe that there was favoritism around Ferrari. Like the people in the legal system or courts tend to side with everything with Ferrari just so McLaren didn't have any reason to compete. And outside the scope of this podcast, and when we talk about theories, there is a huge rabbit hole for this on Reddit. So just have fun with that if you're bored. And if you're curious about what happened to Mike, well, Mike continues to be part of an automotive racing and claims to write all of the details about this incident in a book. And he claims that he's going to call this book Red Mist. I'm going to be honest. I was so triggered by everything in Mike's court case and what happened. Like, if you want to read the book, all means, let me know. I'm going to be honest. I didn't even fact check to see if it's published. And what happened to Nigel? The world's most renowned insider threat in Formula One in automotive racing history. What happened to this guy? Well, 3 years later, on September 29th of 2010, Nigel was sentenced to 1 year and 8 months of prison and was fined 600 euros for his part of the breach of NDA, sabotage, industrial espionage, sporting fraud, attempt of serious injury, and then the sentence, this is what's interesting, the sentence, all of this was just reduced to basically a fine. Nigel did a plea bargain and did not serve any time in prison whatsoever. Now, Nigel did not have, and this was actually really sad when I was reading about it, he didn't have a long life after the sentencing. In fact, on May 2nd of 2014, Nigel was a victim to a very, very serious car accident, and on scene, he was pronounced to be unalived. But he did leave a very, very big legacy and a very big turning point on how data internally was handled with Formula One. Now, with cybersecurity, we often think about protecting the outside threats coming in, but often we forget about the threats that are already on our network, especially ones that we don't expect, such as insider threats. And you don't have to be working at a Fortune 500 or a fancy sports car company to think insider threats aren't a risk. Insider threats come in many forms and variants. This can be the disgruntled employee like Nigel, or employees who will use insider information for personal gain like Mike. Regardless, if you have concerns about insider threats in your company, I recommend talking to your supervisor or someone that is in legal and HR to see what the proper steps in reporting and also spotting this type of behavior, because you never know who you truly work with. Now, we are going into our last debrief for this lab assignment. And trust me, I tried this was such a hard decision for me. I went back and forth on what this last debrief was. Should it be about a ransomware attack? Should it be about a Trojan? Should it be about a video game regarding F1 being hacked? And trust me, there was so many interesting things, including Lewis Hamilton's X feed, formerly Twitter, getting hacked and him posting a lot of interesting things on that. But I wanted to talk about the hardware of the Formula One car. And truth be told, I am not a product security expert. I do not do hardware hacking. And my specialty in cyber is more on the defense and detection engineering side. No offense to those who do hardware hacking. It's just something I couldn't get into. But hey, I always like to hear from you all if you do have some input and stuff like that. And as of the date of when this podcast is released, it has been confirmed that a Formula One car has not been hacked, at least during a race. And if it has been hacked, I'm assuming it's most likely behind closed doors and in an ethical way. If you think about it, there are a lot of components that build this very expensive Formula One car. And we're talking about basically the brain of the steering system. We're talking about the brakes, the telemetry that's being collected, the headgear that even the drivers have to wear. There's so many different components. And I will say, I came across this by complete accident. When I was doing this research, my poor cache in cookies is just so all over the place with all of the different Formula One things I've, just hit accept and allowed for. And I came across this one site called pcgamer.com, and I came across this one guy. His name is Jacob Fox, and I was reading a couple of his articles and I just rabbit holed, and then I came across one that really piqued my interest regarding Formula One cars. And regardless, I looked up Jacob Fox, and Jacob Fox, if you were listening to this, please reach out to me. I definitely would love to have you on my podcast as a guest, because your articles are awesome, man. And I'm just going to give you a huge shout out here. I creeped on you on LinkedIn, so hit me up if you do hear about this, or internet, please do your thing. I need this guy on my podcast because, again, I'm not a hardware person, but how he wrote this article really got me thinking about how an F1 car can be accessible to the internet. And I don't really know if an F1 car has direct access to the internet. Like, they're not hosting Wi-Fi, they're not hosting Bluetooth. They're not like your commercial grade family van where you could just pull up Netflix and just watch it in the car, or if you buy a data plan for your car and, you know, all these things. I don't know. But then again, if they do have it, it's not something that is very publicized. Again, I don't know. I would consider it something not needed. And you also have to think the amount of people that go to these F1 events, especially the out of the door tickets. You don't know who's sitting near the racetrack at all, because there can be some script kiddies just sitting there peening the car all day, trying to DDoS the car off of the road, as scary as that sounds. But I read this article by Jacob, and you can search it up. I'll include it in the link of the description, of course. But he talks about how he essentially highlights about how an F1 car has an IP address. And this is allegations from a previous ex-F1 senior system engineer. And if you really think about it, I guess an F1 car probably does have an IP address, and that's what Jacob pulls out of this article. And if you think about some of the really sophisticated vehicles that go really fast, like a bullet train or whatever, there is technology in there that does have an IP address, because again, these are things that require some form of communication. And also, if you really think about it, the telemetry on the car being uploaded to a cloud service, you know, something on that car has to talk to the internet somehow. And if we really think about, and we also have to think about all of the different types of sensors on the car. They have to communicate and report data back somehow, maybe through local log storage. I don't know. A lot of the stuff, again, is super hush-hush. But if you think about it, even though it's not a commercial grade car, hosting Bluetooth, hosting Wi-Fi, there has to be some form of IP address or just hardware connection somewhere on this car. There has to be an IP address, if not multiple, on this car. And if you really, really think about it, it kind of adds some level of fear. And if we have an IP address that's collecting and sensing all, like, associated to all this data collection, being the source, and how data's sending information out, how it's forwarding communication across the network, or, you know, whatever that architecture diagram that is clearly not disclosed on the internet. If you think about the hardware side on this, and again, this is all theory and speculation, think about if you put a random USB somewhere on, or not even a USB, but like inserting a rogue device somewhere on an F1 car. I'm sure, with strong speculation, that there is no security components on there to prevent an unauthorized device to be added as a sensor or whatever. And again, right, this is just theoretics. I have no idea what is actually on an F1 car, but again, I definitely wanted to give Jacob a huge shout out on this, because this is some good forethought as to the electronic control units, how everything is integrated, and then what if you happen to remotely connect into these things, and these things have to have updates somehow. But it's kind of cool thinking how these super fast Formula One cars are just little tiny IP addresses around the racetrack. So instead of pushing packets, they're pushing points, I guess. So anyways, Defenders in Lab Coats, I really, really enjoyed this episode. I'm so glad that we had this opportunity to, you know, have this time in the lab. And like I said, other Formula One security events out there, like the actual Formula One phone application being hacked and sending encrypted push notifications to its users. So let me know if you guys have come across anything or even have anything to add with this podcast. I always try to have a different outreach with all of my listeners. And again, Formula One is something that I'm very passionate about, and I'm glad I can share a couple of fun tidbits in history regarding Formula One and some of their teams. And plus, who knows, maybe if you watch the next Formula One race, instead of looking at little tiny sports cars on the TV, you're thinking about tiny little IP addresses going around the track. So thank you, Jacob Fox, for that. And as always, please help our lab grow here. Your comments, ratings, and sharing the podcast absolutely helps us grow, helps us put new resources and really time and effort into into the research of the podcast as well. So thank you guys so much for that. And of course, remember to check out CyberLab Con. Like I said, I'm really pushing the merch. The first 50 people are going to get that awesome limited time Cyberspeak Lab sticker as well. So thank you guys, and I look forward to seeing you again in the lab soon. Bye!